right, well, good morning. This presentation today is provided by the Epilepsy Foundation of Minnesota. We're a local nonprofit organization that serves the entire state of Minnesota and eastern North Dakota. The Epilepsy Foundation of Minnesota is an affiliate of the National Epilepsy Foundation, and I am Lisa Peterson. I'm the regional coordinator in the Northland, and I also have with me today my colleague Mary Mavison, who will be helping us. And then we have Dr. Heck, who will be presenting today, and I'll share a little bit more about Dr. Heck in just a moment here. A couple of housekeeping things for you to be aware of. This is an hour-long presentation. Please do not have too many things open, such as music applications. It will result in a poor quality experience. And also, if you have any other tech use in your house, such as Netflix or Xbox, things that might be pulling your internet, those are things to be aware of too that you might want to close out of. And we do have a question box that you can use. So if you have questions, we're going to have some time at the very end to answer those questions. And so if you are thinking of those questions and want to include those throughout, or if you want to hold them for the end, just wanting to make you aware of that. And we will have our webinar posted on our website for future viewing as well. So today, I do want to mention again that we have the ability to ask questions. And so you will see in the question box, such as where you see here on this slide, this example that somebody asked, and you can see where that box is, and you can type in your question and then hit send, and then we will see that and be able to answer those. To avoid any confusion, we've disabled the chat feature. So if you see that on your screen, know that that one is disabled, but you can use the question box. So as I mentioned, we do have a guest presenter with us today. We have Douglas G. Heck, PhD, who's a licensed psychologist at Duluth Psychological Clinic. He is also with us at the Epilepsy Foundation of Minnesota on the Professional Advisory Board as a member, and you'll see his contact there for his email. So we're very delighted to have Dr. Heck with us today. And so at this point, I'm going to introduce Dr. Heck to you and let him tell you a little bit more about himself.
Thank you, Lisa. Should I go ahead?
Okay. Go ahead, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, does that look okay? Okay. Well, it's very nice to be with everyone this morning. I'm looking forward to spending some time with you this morning talking about mental health in the context of having epilepsy. I am a psychologist and have been working with people with epilepsy and their families for over 30 years. And as Lisa mentioned, I'm a member of the Professional Advisory Board with the Epilepsy Foundation and have worked over the years to provide some information and some care, as well as some periodic workshops and things like that for people with epilepsy. So today is a time for us to really focus in on really trying to understand a little bit more about what one can do to help with maintaining and maybe even improving their mental health while living with epilepsy. Everyone is aware today that we're living in the midst of a pandemic, and I will be talking a little bit about that today. I have some information at the end that I have provided, which is some specific information for living with the pandemic and maintaining one's mental health. So I probably won't go into that in a whole lot of detail today. Today is going to be really focused in on really having us really look at what we can do to improve our mental health in the context of having seizures and having epilepsy. At the end, I think Lisa said we can take some questions as well, so we'd be glad to talk about anything related to COVID or epilepsy at that time. So let's take a look at some of these slides today that you're looking at. And again, if you have questions about anything in the slide, please write them out and we'll talk about them toward the end. And if we don't get to your questions, then we'll certainly make an attempt to get to them at some point after the webinar is over. All right, so let me start this here today. One of the very first things that I'd like to do here today is to leave you with the information that I would like you to have when you walk away from this webinar. We'll go through a lot of information today, but this is the most important information in my opinion. And that information is that it's, in order to take care of our mental health, it's important to practice good epilepsy care. Many of us already know what that means, but I'll go through some of that today as well. A very big point from today is that I'd like to encourage everyone to make sure that you're taking time to notice and understand your mental health. We oftentimes take it for granted. We get up in the morning, we do what we're doing during the day, and we sometimes don't even think about how we're doing emotionally or cognitively or otherwise with our mental health. In order to take care of it, we first have to notice it and make sure that we know what helps our mental health, what takes away from our mental health, and what affects it in general. And sometimes people can do that by just noticing and taking time to notice, or other times one can write some things down to remember it as well. And lastly, today I'm going to talk about setting up a personal pathway or just a goal that you might have that is a very specific effort on your part to try to improve your mental health. So we'll talk about these things today. So as I mentioned, it's important to be able to notice your mental health. And for some of us, we are aware that there's very specific things that help our mental health. If you're a person that really knows that you need to be sitting on the shore of a lake somewhere, watching a fire and the moon go down, and that's what helps your mental health for the next few days or few weeks, then it's important that you're working on including that into your life. If you're somebody that specifically benefits from being able to look at the beauty in the world and being able to look at specifically at some very small springtime flowers in the forest floor, then those are things that are important to build into your life rather than just wish for them to happen. It's important that we are very active at building into our life the things that we know that help us. If you're a person that enjoys reading under the covers at night, then by all means, that's the kind of thing that should be in your life rather than just hoping that it's in your life. People who are living with epilepsy by large are doing well. Many children, adolescents, and adults with epilepsy are happy, they're satisfied with their lives, and they cope well with their condition, and they're doing well generally in their lives. So today's webinar is not based upon the fact that everyone with epilepsy is really struggling, because that's not the case. There are some typical struggles, though, that people go through who have epilepsy. And these are struggles that we'll talk about a little bit today, because it's important for parents or people with epilepsy or family members to be aware of these and then to be looking at ways to address them. In children, one of the things that's perhaps the most, I guess it's not necessarily one of the things, but these are the common things that children often struggle with who have epilepsy. School and cognitive performance are oftentimes major concerns for parents, perhaps a little bit more so than children themselves. And we worry about that because that's going to affect all sorts of things for them in terms of their grades, their capacity to stay in school, and their capacity to learn. Cognition and school performance is sometimes affected by the epilepsy itself. Sometimes it's affected by medication, sometimes both, or there may be other factors as well. Unfortunately, stigma is alive and well, and this is especially powerful sometimes in negative ways toward children when they're in school. They can sometimes be made fun of, or there can be some false beliefs about epilepsy from other children that cause children to be shunned in school. The Epilepsy Foundation has worked for many years to try to reduce stigma in schools by through the Seizure Smart program, as also by going out and giving presentations to schools and working with school nurses. So there's a lot that we're doing to try to reduce the stigma, but unfortunately it's still alive and well. So it's important for children and families to be working through issues such as bullying that might occur in school, or rejection, things along those lines. Acceptance by peers for children is very important. So keeping an eye on that as a parent is very important to see what else can be done to make sure that's happening in spite of the epilepsy. Teenagers have their own struggles. They're working on things that are a little bit further down the road. These are things that are important for them based upon their age and their biology of their body. These are what they're supposed to be doing. These are the things that sometimes they struggle with, though, figuring out how and when to become more independent. Sometimes teenagers with seizures develop their independence a little bit later than other teenagers, and then sometimes those teens feel like they're behind their peers. Working on trying to drive and get a job and date sometimes can be issues for teenagers as well who are having seizures. These are the tasks that we want teenagers to be working on. These are the normal developmental tasks that we expect what we call middle teenagers to be working on. This is their job. These are the things that they're to figure out. And as parents, our job is to try to facilitate this, to help teenagers, for example, figure out, is it important for them to do what's expected of them? Or is it important for them to have their own path and be a little bit more of a nonconformist? Teenagers at this age are trying to figure out what their peer group is. They may change their peer groups from time to time, trying to sort things out. They're trying to also sort out who they are and what their abilities are, what their strengths are, and kind of develop a sense of how they exist in this world and how they relate in this world. So these are the things that we want teenagers to be working on. Unfortunately, sometimes epilepsy can interfere with these and make it more difficult than usual. Families will also have their own struggle with epilepsy at times. When the initial diagnosis of epilepsy comes in of a family member, this is can be a very disruptive occurrence within the family, because now it means that something else is going on in the family that we don't really fully understand yet. We're not really sure what to do about it. And the process of establishing a comprehensive epilepsy care can take some time. Some families at the very beginning maybe downplay the process of having epilepsy. Other family members, it becomes a huge issue for them. But overall, it's important for the family to begin to develop a team that they can work with. That might include physicians, nurses, pharmacists, mental health people, school teachers, social workers, all sorts of people who can help the family maintain its integrity and maintain the fact that it needs to be doing well on a daily basis. And reaching out and establishing a team can be very, very important for families. But one of the jobs of a family is to help each of the members of the family perform each day and do well and do the things that they're supposed to be doing. So children, of course, are supposed to be going to school, working on building their self-esteem and establishing friendships. And sometimes epilepsy can interfere with these. So a lot of families that I work with often have questions about how do we help our child maintain friendships or build friendships in spite of having seizures, or in spite of sometimes having problems from their medication. So these are issues that families oftentimes struggle with. Adults, of course, are often struggling with similar and some different issues. Notice that I put the word stigma here as well, because as adults live their lives, they become aware very painfully sometimes that stigma does still exist. And because of that, sometimes they get shunned or rejected, or sometimes it makes it difficult to date or to work because of what other people think of people who have epilepsy. Like I said, the Epilepsy Foundation is working every day and has been for years to try to reduce the stigma. And sometimes it's important for adults to figure out how they're going to address this in their day-to-day life. What do they do when they notice somebody having a belief about epilepsy that isn't true? Do they stay quiet? Do they talk to the person about it? Do they hand them some information? Adults oftentimes wrestle with how to maintain employment in spite of sometimes having seizures. Do I let my boss know about them? Do I not? How do I arrange for transportation? So these are very real issues and ones that adults wrestle with often. When we think about our mental health, it's important to understand that there's a lot of different influences on all of our mental health status, whether we have epilepsy or not. Our early history and our early family environment probably forms one of the most influential pieces to our mental health. Many mental health professionals believe that the first 5 years of our lives actually set us up for our mental health and how well we're going to do in the world. So if we have good family relations and solid loving relationships at that time in our life, a lot of times that sets us up to have better mental health later on. Of course, our health makes a difference in our mental health, whether we have a history of any kind of trauma in the past or however the losses that we go through as we go through our childhood oftentimes set us up to either have a vulnerability for problems like depression later on, or sometimes it may cause us to have very strong fears that keep us from having a fuller life. It's important that we also understand that our patterns that we have of how we think about things also influence our mental health. If we're a pessimist, if we believe that when something goes wrong, it's our fault, if we believe that something inevitably is going to go wrong in our lives and that you're never going to have a good life, those are kinds of psychological patterns that can set us up to be more vulnerable for depression and anxiety and other problems. So it's important to be able to examine when you're looking at your own mental health about these areas and really try to better understand what the influences are, and then you can take some action to address them. Well, let's take a moment and let's talk about happiness. In my opinion, this little guy looks like he's pretty happy, kind of smugly happy, if you ask me. And what I'm asking you to do is to take a look at what you know about yourself and what brings about your own happiness. If you believe that walking around in your jammies and carrying a tippy cup makes you happy, then by all means, that should be a part of your everyday existence. I'm just saying, if that's what makes you happy, you should do it. This little guy is, and he seems pretty happy to me. So let's talk about happiness and what we know about it. These are some studies that were done a while back and really identified 4 things that are generally present in people's lives who are reporting that they're happy. The belief that one is choosing their own path in life really speaks to people feeling like they have some control over their life and that they're making decisions to try to make it better. The issue of competence is one that sometimes can come up for people with epilepsy because oftentimes having seizures or being on medication can cause people to not necessarily go through school in the way that they wish, or maybe take on a college or a vocational school. And in some cases, people end up feeling like they are not necessarily good at something in their life, or that they can be competent in doing something. So if that's an issue for someone with epilepsy, then I'm oftentimes encouraging people to specifically seek out ways to gain a sense of competence. It might be learning to play the guitar. It might mean learning how to build something in the garage, or it might be learning how to write a book and how to set up a blog. Those are all things in which it's important for people to figure out because it helps them feel like they can do things, which is a critical part of being happy. Connectedness and relatedness is important. That's unfortunately something that's been harder to do during the virus. And us building on our self-esteem and feeling good about ourselves is all critical. So these are things that are important for people who are seeking happiness. If you're a parent, these are the things I'd encourage you to think about as you're thinking about your child and your teenager. I like this one. This is kind of a funny little saying. May have some sense in it though. Having a high standard for yourself, but having some tolerance for other people might be a good attitude to have to foster happiness. I really like this book. This is a book called The How of Happiness. I have the reference at the end. It's easy to find. This person did a lot of work on really looking at a lot of different studies of what brings about happiness for people. And by looking at a number of studies, she found that in general, most of our level of happiness is really based upon pretty much who we are, our genetic contributions, and she calls it our set point. So about half of the extent to which we are happy is pretty much kind of set. But notice that the other half is something that we can do something about. Circumstances, as you see on this slide, really refers to things like our living situation, our financial situation, things like that. Intentional activity means that almost half of our happiness can be affected by what we do. So this is the good and important point of this information. We have the potential to change and improve our level of happiness. It's not just set in stone completely. Here are the activities that are important to think about when you're looking at building in happiness into your life. Take a look at your life and see to what extent you're engaging in these kinds of things. Practicing acts of kindness. We know that when we act toward others the way that we want others to act toward us, it can really make a difference in our day and overall in our mood and our level of happiness. When we're working with people who might be kind of bleak and dark, can we take some time to help them see that there might be some hope and some optimism for the future? By doing that and helping someone else do that, we can sometimes then have the benefits of that come back on ourselves. People with epilepsy, as do others, sometimes compare themselves to others. And in some cases it's helpful, but in many cases it's not. It's very important for people to be careful about not always comparing yourself to people that have a whole different life or a different set of circumstances. It's important to be able to work toward accepting ourselves for who we are. When I work with people on building happiness, one of the very first things I talk about is expressing and having a good sense of gratitude. Being aware of what's going well, being appreciative is perhaps one of the strongest aspects of people's lives who rate themselves as being happy. Take a look and see what this slide says, because I feel like it's important as well. People with epilepsy are people first and foremost. They just happen to have a condition called epilepsy. This quote says that happiness comes from seeing ourselves as being okay, just as we are today, without comparison to others, without reference to the way we were or the way we fear we will be. Building this sense of self-acceptance can be difficult sometimes for people with epilepsy because they know that they have a condition that makes them different than others. So this is a task that people with epilepsy have that's important for them to work on. How do they and how do you find a way to be accepting of what is going on in your life without comparing yourselves extensively to others, and with putting yourself first as a person, not putting your epilepsy first? When we go through and we look at studies of people with epilepsy and what they have, what determines the extent of their ratings of their quality of life, people with epilepsy tend to rate their lives better when they're employed, when they are on generally just one medication, and of course, if they are having an absence of seizures. Those are the factors that tend to bring about a better rating of quality of life for people with epilepsy. People who are struggling with severe seizures, medication side effects, depression and anxiety, these individuals tend to rate their quality of life much lower. Please note that over time we've learned that physicians and patients do not always have the same understanding of your quality of life. If you feel that your quality of life is low and you're struggling with depression, or you're struggling with memory difficulties, things like this, your physician may or may not know that. This is where it's important for you to be able to say, hey, I'm not happy with my life the way it is. What else can we do about it? So here are some things that I'm going to promote for you today in terms of how can you, as someone with epilepsy, improve your mental health. I'm going to give you a guide today to follow that, but I'm encouraging you to set up a strategy, take some time to make some changes, take some small steps. Prepare for your own resistance, because change is hard. And if you need help making changes, there's help in the community through the Epilepsy Foundation and the mental health community. This is a model I encourage you to keep in mind. This is a model that I find is helpful for people with epilepsy. In terms of finding better mental health, it starts with, at the bottom, building a foundation of good, basic epilepsy care. Let's take a look at what that means. It means that you're working with your epilepsy team on these issues. Not only seizure control, but focusing on things like sleep and nutrition and your activity level. When we go back and look at this model, once the epilepsy care is established, then it's important to really take a look at the extent to which you feel safe in your life. What this means is look at the physical safety risks in your life. To what extent are you taking risks that are not safe? Things that you need to reconsider. Parents of children with epilepsy have to take a look at the risks that they're having as parents, or as a parent with epilepsy who might have a young person. Taking care of a young person from a parent who's having seizures sometimes requires some planning and some figuring out of what to do in case they have a seizure. So planning for physical safety for yourself and others around you is important, and really looking for the extent to which you feel psychologically safe. Are you in relationships that are negative or abusive? Is there bullying going on at school or in your life in general? If these issues are going on, it's pretty hard to develop full level of happiness and solid mental health care unless someone feels safe. A third issue here in terms of working on mental health, it has to do with the extent to which we are connecting with others. These are the ways that we all connect with others. These are the important things that need to be in our lives to the extent that's possible. We all need a little help from someone else. And it's important that we try to stay connected, even in the age of COVID, and find some ways to be able to connect in good ways. Children at risk of rejection, and if that's happening, it's extremely important to be able to take a look at what can happen within the school or within their friendships to reduce that. Adults who are struggling with dating need to figure out, why are they struggling? Is it how they're coming across? Is it that they are just not connecting with the right people? Building skills and relating to others can be important for people with epilepsy. This is something that you can get help with if you need to. And making sure that you're connecting with others based on who you are, and not necessarily the fact that you have epilepsy. Social disconnection is probably one of the biggest issues that people report in epilepsy as a problem in their life. So when we take a look at adults or children or teenagers that are really working on this, I see this as a very, very important issue, and one to be developing some strategies for how to improve, seek out help from others, and figuring out how they have worked through this. This is something to not necessarily ignore. Working on how we feel about ourselves, or what we call esteem needs, is also a big part of mental health. But again, it's hard to do this unless some of the needs below have been met already. This is the whole point of this model. Once we feel like we've taken care of some of the safety issues in our lives and we have some pretty good connections with others, this is where it's important to build on who we are. Finding out who we are, our areas of strength, engaging in activities such as Camp Oz through the Epilepsy Foundation, which I feel is one of the more powerful ways of children building their self-esteem. music camps, traveling. There's all sorts of ways for us all to build our ways of believing in ourselves, finding areas that we can achieve in, identifying whether we feel shame in our lives. Shame robs us often of good mental health, and if that's happening, we need to be able to talk about it and figure out how to get some help for it. So this is the model that I just talked about. This is the model I'm encouraging you to keep in mind when you're looking at improving your mental health. Let's talk about depression. Depression sometimes looks like depression, and sometimes it looks like people are depressed, like this guy, when they're really not. He's probably just sleeping off a lunch. Sadness is not the same as depression. Depression is by nature harmful. Sadness isn't necessarily harmful, it's uncomfortable, but depression is something that we want to really focus in on. These are the signs of depression, not just something that's happening on a single day, but a day after day after day after day. We know that people with epilepsy have a higher rate of depression than do people in the general population. You can see this. In general, it's typically higher in females, and sometimes can run as high as 30% of people with epilepsy may struggle with epilepsy. Fairly similar to people with other chronic conditions as well. Why are we concerned about depression? Because it includes problematic issues like not wanting to take one's medication, not taking care of oneself. It increases our healthcare costs. And of course, sometimes it causes suicidal ideation. People with epilepsy have a rate of suicide about 5 to 7 times higher than people in the general population. So when we take a look at our mental health and depression, it isn't so much what happens to us in our lives. It's not based upon whether we have epilepsy or not. It's how we handle our epilepsy. It's how we handle what happens in our lives. People who are depressed tend to believe that when they're successful, that it was due to something outside of themselves. It was just luck. It was just, it'll never happen again. But when they fail, they tend to blame themselves. Notice that when people aren't depressed, those two things are turned around. When they're successful, they take credit for it. When they fail, they say, hey, let's change how we think, and that in turn changes how we feel. Some people with epilepsy have attitudes that are problematic for their mental health. I'll never have any friends. No one will ever hire me. If people have attitudes like this, they're going to get in the way of some mental health stability for them. People who are depressed in epilepsy tend to have more problematic things in their life besides their epilepsy. They tend to feel that they are more disabled. They tend to not be as good with their epilepsy care. They tend to have more conflicts in their life. They may not work as often or at all. They may do worse in school. So those issues of depression are why we focus on it, because depression is not benign. Depression is something that hurts someone's life and can be changed. Let's talk for a few minutes about anxiety. Here are some of the main symptoms of anxiety. There's others as well, but anxiety is also prominent in people with epilepsy. The worry and fear of having the next seizure is oftentimes one of the more difficult aspects of having epilepsy. And sometimes that fear is what keeps people in. They may isolate, or they may avoid other relationships for fear of having a seizure in front of someone. I've worked with people over the years who are fearful of using the bus because of having a seizure on the bus. And so they stay home. It keeps them from being able to work, keeps them from having friends and engaging in activities. And so this fear can be really strong. And it's present in children as well as adults. Well, let me go back to this last slide. In terms of the anxiety that people have, one of the things that we know about anxiety and epilepsy is that it's understandable for people to have this fear. Anyone who has unpredictable changes in their health that's obvious to someone else, whether it's having a seizure or a diabetic reaction or memory lapses, whatever it might be, is going to have anxiety about it. That's not the issue. The issue is not letting the anxiety rule our lives so that it keeps us from moving forward. It's important to have a plan for how to address the anxiety, figuring out when is the best time to go out on the bus, for example, having a backup plan in case you do have a seizure, not carrying all of your valuables with you when you do go on the bus, for example, in case you have a seizure. There's ways of working through the anxiety, and this is what I'm encouraging everyone today to do, to think about if this is going on for you. Anxiety is something that can be addressed. Well, today, unfortunately, we're all going through the pandemic, and there's a lot of good information in this resource that I'm going to give you here. It's called Face COVID. This is something that can be searched for on the internet very easily. It's an ebook or an e-pamphlet. So we're not going to have time to go through a lot of the details of this, but I can let you know that it has some very nice suggestions in it. I do encourage you to search this out. But in addition, there's a lot of other information out there about how to work through the pandemic as well. All right, so today I'm going to review a little bit from today. Today, we did talk about some strategies for improving mental health for people with epilepsy. I'm encouraging you to use Maslow's model. Start at the bottom, work on your building good epilepsy care, then consider the degree to which you feel safe in your life. Work your way up through the model. This is kind of a pathway. It allows you to have a very specific path to work on. When we think about improving our mental health, a lot of times people aren't really sure what to do. This is a model. Pick something that's reasonable to work on. Don't set up a goal of I'm saying I'm going to have 40 friends by the end of the month. Pick something that's going to work for you. Allow yourself some time for change, because change is difficult. And again, if you're working on changing and improving your mental health and it's really a struggle, be sure you're connecting with the Epilepsy Foundation, other trusted people in your life, parents, teachers, clergy, anyone who you feel like you can reach out to, and of course the mental health community as well. So here's our take-home messages from today. If you're looking to care for your mental health, practice good epilepsy care. Take time to notice and understand your mental health. Notice when you're having a bad day. Figure out why that might be. Is it because you had an argument with someone who you love? Is it because you didn't sleep well? Is it because you're not eating well? Is it because of some other kinds of things? Take a look and notice, perhaps write them out. That will allow you to begin to start making some changes. Notice what makes your mental health better. Is it talking to a favorite friend who you haven't talked to for a while? Is it building something? Is it being good and kind to others? Is it building into your life a sense of gratitude? That's the one thing that I feel like can have one of the biggest effects on your mental health. Don't be afraid to do something different from the crowd. Look around. See what else is going on in your life. Notice. Be mindful of what's happening in your life that might be taking away from your mental health, or things that you're missing that could make your mental health different. Don't be afraid to get out of your routine a bit. Here are the resources for today. The Epilepsy Foundation has a number of resources that most of us are aware of. This How of Happiness is a wonderful book about what we know about happiness. Welcoming the Unwelcome is written by a Buddhist monk. This is a really good book if you're interested in taking a look at how to be around things that are really difficult. She has some wonderful ideas. Therapist Aid has a lot of different handouts for you to look at, questionnaires to take to help you develop better understanding of your situation. And the anxiety and phobia workbook is full of a lot of good information for you to read and understand and practice. So that's it for today. I think we'll take some time for some questions. I think I might need to stop sharing my screen and we'll let Lisa come back.
All right, well, thank you for all of that great information. And as Dr. Heck mentioned, at this time, we'd welcome you to ask any questions that you have. And again, you have a chat feature. And so if you want to put a question in at this point, you are welcome to do that. We're not able to hear you or see you, but you have that ability to type in a message if you are thinking about something and you have a question for Dr. Heck today. All right, while we are waiting for some questions to start rolling in, Dr. Heck, maybe you have some commonly asked questions that you are thinking about right now that maybe people haven't voiced, but you know that are often questions that come up as you're dealing with people.
Well, I think it comes back to, for a lot of people with epilepsy who I work with and familiar with, it's really about building in, making sure that people are building in a good team of people to help them deal with their epilepsy. And that team oftentimes for many people involves a physician, in some cases it involves a nurse as well. But I'm really encouraging people to seek out a wider team and to really build in the care that can be provided from people who are working with the county, for example, who can provide resources that you might not be aware of, or building in care from mental health resources. Doesn't have to be a psychologist, but it can be somebody who's helping you figure out the mental health side of things. So I keep coming back to the importance of having a good comprehensive team to work with, because this oftentimes is difficult.
Thanks, Dr. Heck. I'm also wondering, I'm thinking a lot of people today are experiencing more isolation than they've ever felt before, and that was possibly, a problem for them before COVID hit. As you're working with people right now who live with epilepsy and are struggling with depression or anxiety, and now on top of that, they're dealing with extra isolation, are there things that you're finding that people are doing to stay engaged during a time where they can't necessarily get out in the community as much as they would previously have done?
Yeah, so I think what I'm hearing from a lot of people is that they are seeking out the connection, and it's hard. And so I'm encouraging people to take a look at having a realistic level of fear about that, so that if someone has so much fear that they are staying in all the time and not necessarily making any connections, then it's really their fear that's keeping them in. And I understand it's important to be somewhat fearful during today's world, but it's also generally safe, according to the CDC and other people, for us to be outside with a mask on in places that are safe. So for someone that's looking to connect, it might be a simple thing such as just sitting out on their front porch or sitting out in their yard and just saying hi to people who are walking by on the sidewalk, or going to a park and reading a book and just watching people as they're going by, or going to a local beach if you happen to live near one, and being able to stay socially distant, but at the same time connecting with others visually, because it might not be so easy to connect with people verbally, but we can keep an eye on what people are doing. And we can sometimes talk to people from a distance who we maybe never would have talked to before, but now it's important to be able to have those connections. I know of people that have practiced their music instrument out on their front lawn instead of inside their house. And this draws in people, and it causes them to start having some smiles and some waves that they maybe didn't have before. going for walks in different parts of the town than you're used to sometimes can add a level of interest for people and allow you to see other people who you're not used to seeing. And sometimes it's just about sitting outside the front door of where you live and doing that in a safe way and connecting in that way.
Awesome. Those are all really great suggestions for ways that people can still get out in the community and be practicing safe social distance and yet not isolating as they are, trying to find ways to stay connected. We did have a question that came in, if you want to view that on your question box too.
Sure.
So the question is, can you say more about how taking epilepsy medication is important to mental health?
Yeah, very good question. So a couple of things. One is epilepsy medication may or may not result in medication side effects. They often do, but they don't always do. So one of the first things I would recommend is to take a look and learn what you can about what possible medication side effects are occurring. Oftentimes people with epilepsy have to make a difficult decision. Do I stay on medicine that might be causing me to not remember things as well, or cause me to be a little bit slower with my thinking in exchange for getting good seizure control? Or is it better for me to have a few seizures but be on less medicine so that I can think better? Not everyone has to have that choice, but some people do. And I think that's a question that needs to be decided with one's physician and medical team, as to decide what's going to bring about your better quality of life. A second way that medication is affected is that sometimes taking medication for teenagers causes them to feel that they're different. And it causes them to have to take a break during the day to go out and take their medicine, or they sometimes just don't take it because they don't want to. And so it's important to figure out a way to be taking medication and be compliant with it, meaning that you're taking it and not forgetting doses. Because if someone is feeling different because of taking their medication, then they're going to feel like they have a lower self-esteem. So it's important to figure a plan out for the medicine. Do they take it when they go into the bathroom so no one knows? Or is there a way of making sure you're remembering to take all the doses that you're supposed to be taking? Because it ultimately will help you feel better about yourself.
Absolutely. Thanks for addressing that question. As you mentioned, it's very complicated when people start thinking about all the different aspects of being compliant with their medication and how important that is to their overall mental health. I was thinking, I know you mentioned it earlier, but it kind of struck me today about one of the important pieces for mental health is having control. And I would say right now, more than ever, people maybe feel like they haven't had as much control over situations in life. And we all need that to have good mental health. And so are there things that you can speak to about ways that people can find that sense of control right now during a time where they feel like maybe there are things that are out of their control, and being able to resolve that in their minds so that they're, not spending unnecessary energy worrying about the things that they can't change, but how to maybe refocus that energy?
Sure. It gets really easy, I think, for all of us to kind of get in the midst of this pandemic and think about the worst and hear all of the various things that are going on. And I think it's important for people to be informed, but I think it's important for people to not be overly informed and overly submerged in all of the news and all of the reports of deaths and infections and things like this. So I'm really encouraging people to practice very careful and small consumption of the news, so that they're not constantly thinking about all of the bad things that are happening, because there are good things going on in this world at the same time, and they get overshadowed. I also think it's important to realize that there is a fair amount right now that is beyond our control. We can't control whether somebody in Texas or California or someone else is wearing a mask. So we have to understand that there's a part of our world that we just don't have the control over, that we would like to have control over, right? Mm-hmm. But we do have control over the things that we do within our day for the most part. And so I think that it's important to be able to breathe and to stay focused in on just what we can do and have some hope that over time people will find the right way and that we can get on the other side of some of this. But if we're constantly barraged by all of the negativity, it gets really hard for us to kind of stay focused on what we can do to make things better. I also encourage people to stay focused on what you can do for your own seizure control. Having seizures means having having episodes that are beyond our control sometimes, but we can stay focused on the risk factors for seizures. So we know that the biggest risk factor for having a seizure is missed medication. So we can take time each day to make sure that we're not missing our doses. And secondly, we can take a look at the extent to which we're sleeping. Some people are sleeping a lot more now during COVID than they were sleeping before. So too much sleep or not enough sleep is also something that we have control over. We need to stay focused in on because that will help us with our seizure control. And looking at things like alcohol and drug use. These are common ways that people are coping with COVID and coping with the isolation, but there are also things that can take away from our seizure control as well. So sometimes people feel like they don't have any control over their seizures, but there are some things that we can do to try to make sure that it's the best that we can do given what we do have control over. So those are some things that I guess I would have to say.
Thanks.
About that.
We have another question that came in, and the question is, do you have any suggestions about how to find a therapist? So not everybody's in close proximity to you, Dr. Hack, and I know you provide services to a lot of people in the area. What would you say to somebody who's wondering about how they should go about finding someone to meet with?
Well, the very first thing I would say is I don't feel that it's important. Well, I don't feel that it's necessary for people with epilepsy to find someone who knows about epilepsy. In other words, looking for a therapist means looking for somebody who you can have a good relationship with, someone who you can develop trust for and have a genuine connection with. That's by far and away way more important than whether or not the person knows about epilepsy. Because there are a lot of people out there that can help and they can learn about the epilepsy. You can teach your therapist about your epilepsy and they can learn enough to be able to help you. But I think going through your primary care physician is oftentimes a good way to go because they often know people in the community. I think going through the Epilepsy Foundation can be important because the foundation also knows therapists in the community. And I also think that going through other people who may have seen a therapist who you might know and get recommendations from them, those are the ways that I suggest. Going in a phone book, you can certainly, I guess we don't have phone books anymore, but going onto the internet for most people is a way you can search to see who's around. But I don't always think that it's helpful because you don't really know much about them. So I'm encouraging you to use these other ways. And if you absolutely need to just cold call someone, I would just call and say, can we have a few minutes on the phone? Because I'd like to know whether it would be a good idea to work with you or not.
Awesome. Those are really great suggestions for how somebody might go about finding a therapist. And I know and I think you mentioned it earlier, that sometimes it's just talking to a person. Maybe they don't necessarily go to a therapist, but even finding somebody in their life to talk to, that they're not
Absolutely.
bottling things in, that they are getting that sense of support, so that hopefully they're finding someone. I'm wondering too, my last question that I wanted to ask before we wrap it up here is, as you're thinking about ways that people are looking to de-stress, I know you mentioned it could be, sitting in front of a fire by the lake, or, finding, whatever that is. If someone were to ask you, what are some good tips for relaxation and stress relief? Do you have some general guidelines or suggestions that you would give to someone on ways to cope with stress and trying to find healthy ways, as opposed to some of those more destructive ways of
Yep, I
dealing with
have a lot
stress?
of suggestions. I do encourage people to make use of the internet or other resources as well. If people were to say, what's the best way to relax and search for that, I think there'd be 1,000 things that come up. And
Mhm.
everyone is different. So some people find it relaxing to go for a walk, others find it not relaxing at all. And so I think people have to really figure out what helps them relax. But the most important things that mental health people will search for or will teach people is first and foremost is breathing. We oftentimes, without realizing it, when we're stressed, we end up breathing really short and shallow, which causes us to not get enough oxygen in our system. And then it causes us to be anxious and nervous and jittery. And so I think people learning how to breathe and when to breathe and doing that regularly during the day is important. Um, and I also encourage people to realize that relaxation is not necessarily being lazy, because there are some people that equate the two. Being relaxation is really about recharging the batteries, which is important for all of us to do. I tend to use the outdoors a lot for people who I work with because there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from being outside, even if it's just on our front porch. So I encourage people to think about what lessons there are outside to help us relax. Doesn't have to be running a marathon. Doesn't have to be getting in a canoe. It can be some very, very simple things.
Awesome.
There's a resource on the slides. The last one on the anxiety workbook has a ton of recommendations for relaxation.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing all of that great information with us today, Dr. Heck. I'm going to share my screen again at this time, and we're going to wrap it up with a couple final slides. And so there's your contact info again for Dr. Heck. And then I do want to mention today that the Epilepsy Foundation of Minnesota has free one-on-one support. We have customized tools and resources. A variety of epilepsy-related topics and materials can be requested through our information and referral services as well. The contact is listed there for my colleague, Debbie Leone. And so you can definitely reach out to Debbie anytime through her email or phone number if you have any questions, or if you go to our website and you click on information and referral, you will find all of that information there as well. And again, thank you for being here. This is my contact information. Again, I'm Lisa Peterson. My email is listed there as well. And so we provide a lot of different opportunities for people to connect, as Dr. Heck mentioned earlier, to help reduce stigma associated with seizures, and to, we educate, we empower, and we connect people affected by epilepsy. And so there are many ways at the EFMN to connect, and you can find more information on our website, and then you will be getting a follow-up email with this evaluation that you see listed there as well. And so just want to thank you all for being here today. Dr. Heck, thank you again for your time and your expertise today. I know there was a lot of really great information shared today and resources, and I appreciate you sharing all of that with us. So
Thank
we
you for having
appreciate,
me.
yeah, thank you. Thank you all, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and we hope that you'll reach out to the Epilepsy Foundation in Minnesota again in the future.